Hello and welcome to the Rays of Hope program brought to you by the Purchase Area Sexual Assault and Child Advocacy Center. I'm your host today, Mary Foley, and today we're going to be focusing on National Child Abuse Prevention Month. Our goal for the program today is that you come away with an increased awareness of the problem of child abuse and you are educated on how you can become involved. Our guests today are Bridgett Maxie with DCBS, Department of Community-Based Services, and Lori Brown, the Clinical Director of the Purchase Area Sexual Assault and Child Advocacy Center. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
Bridgett, just take a moment. We're going to start with you. Just tell us what you do at DCBS, how long you've been with that organization.
I'm a supervisor at Department for Community-Based Services, formerly called Social Services.
Okay.
I've been there for 11 years.
Okay.
So I'm a supervisor over the investigative unit.
Okay, well, thank you for joining us today. Lori, tell us a little bit about yourself.
I'm the Director of Clinical Services for the Purchase Area Sexual Assault and Child Advocacy Center, and I've been there for about 4 years, and I've worked with children and trauma for about 10 years now.
So you have both of you bring a wealth of experience to this topic. So, you know, I know there are lots of months with lots of different titles. It seems like you can flip a calendar and it's some sort of important month to someone, but I feel like Child Abuse Prevention Month is something that affects all of us. And Lori, I noticed that you have a blue ribbon on your lapel today. Why do you wear the blue ribbon?
Well, Mary, the blue ribbon does represent Child Abuse Prevention Month, and I think the awareness at a national level really started back in the 80s. The actual blue ribbon campaign started with a grandmother who was very concerned about her grandchildren who were being physically abused, and unfortunately she was not able to get the help and response that she needed for those children, and it ended in tragedy for them. And so I think in their memory, for her to be able to remember them and to also bring awareness to other people, she started wearing a blue ribbon to represent the bruises that she saw on them.
Wow.
And so that's just grown over the last 25, 30 years.
And so it seems interesting to me, and I guess tragic in some ways to me, that it wasn't until the 80s that we began to talk about this problem on a grander scale. What has your experience been, and either one of you can answer this, on the scope of the problem of child abuse? Is it a problem in our community?
The problem of child abuse in our area is more prevalent than the general public would have knowledge of. I mean, generally we investigate around 75 reports of child abuse per month. Wow. So the problem is larger than just a normal person would understand if they don't generally work in this area. So.
Yeah, I'm astounded at that number. And Lori, from your perspective and from the knowledge base that you have, how does that play out on the national scene?
Well, like I said earlier, I think we really didn't become aware of or acknowledge the problem of child abuse until the 80s. But even over the last 30 years with that acknowledgement, I still don't think, like Bridgett said, that just people in general who don't work in this field understand the scope of the problem. We know that children compromise the victim, or make up the majority of all victims of interpersonal violence, including sexual violence, which is kind of our specific area. Children are 3 times more likely to be victims of rape than adults are. 30% of all forcible rapes occur before the age of 11, and another 30% occur between the ages of 11 and 17. So just looking at sexual violence alone, the kids in this country make up the majority of victims of all forcible rapes happening here.
Wow.
Right.
And Bridgett, you mentioned other forms of abuse. Before the show, you mentioned emotional abuse, neglect, physical abuse. Could you just give us a layman's definition of what that looks like?
Physical abuse is pretty self-explanatory. I mean, it would be any type of injury that's non-intentional, any type of injury to a child that would leave a bruise or a mark. Neglect is a wide category. Actually, it's the largest category of abuse that we do investigate. It can range from anything from lack of supervision to failing to meet just basic needs as far as the cleanliness of the home and having utilities and that. Emotional abuse is also, it's difficult to define because there's so many different types of forms of emotional abuse, but and then sexual abuse is obviously pretty self-explanatory.
So the abuse problem, sexual abuse alone, based on the numbers that you give me great pause, and I'm certain they do the viewers as well. And then when you add the other categories in, I can see where that 75 per month in one county alone, where that number really is coming from and how shocking that it is. Is there anything that either one of you feel like you need to add just to set the stage for the scope of the problem for the viewer?
Well, maybe just looking at some specific numbers, not only for this community, but just nationwide, and I think really worldwide. Research has shown very consistently that about 1 out of every 4 girls and about 1 out of every 6 boys will experience some type of sexual victimization before they're 18. That's just looking at sexual violence alone.
Mm-hmm.
That's a lot of children.
It is a lot of children. So I think the next natural question is, what do we do? What do I do? What does the viewer do when we hear or we suspect or we think something doesn't look quite right? What do they do?
Well, they just need to call our office and make a report to our office of their concerns. It's important that they have specific information about their concerns, and it's also important for the public to know that they're not required to leave their name. They can call anonymously because a lot of people, a common misconception in their fear in reporting is that we're going to reveal the reporting source. We're not allowed to do that by our policy and by statute. So, you know, it's important that even if you suspect abuse, you don't have to know, you don't have to investigate. It's our job to do those things. It's your job to call and report your concerns to our department.
Now, when you say it's your job, are you appealing to a moral obligation or a legal obligation or both?
I would say both. I mean, the law says basically anyone who suspects child abuse is required to report. The law also sets out specific examples of people that are required to do such, but basically anybody that has a concern or suspicion of child abuse is required to report that to our agency.
Now, Bridgett, you know, something that the viewer might be thinking is, well, I know how that DCBS office works. They're going to come in and take that person's kids, and I don't want to be responsible for that. Right. What would you say to that concern?
That's another one of the most common misconceptions, is that we just automatically remove children from the home, which is, we do not do that. I mean, we're mandated by law to assess the safety of the children in the home, and to leave children and work with families with their children in the home as long as it can be done safely. I mean, obviously there are some very high-risk situations, and unfortunately there are some children that need to be removed from their home for their safety. Mm-hmm. But our job is to maintain the family and to work and provide whatever services and referrals that we can to ensure that the children remain with their parents as long as it can be done safely.
Okay. And Lori, you said you've been working, you know, with trauma and abuse for many, many years. Have there been times when you have had people approach you that maybe they were concerned and have expressed these fears? I don't know what to do. I'm afraid of this or that. What would you say to them as a person who provides treatment to those children who are removed from the home?
Right. I would want them to understand how important it is, number one, that child that they may be concerned about be in a safe environment, and that they would need to follow through with reporting to the appropriate agency. And then number two, just how important it is for that child to get the intervention services that they so desperately need. Unfortunately, we know that most kids in these situations don't just experience one trauma. Usually it's multiple traumas over a period of time. And so those effects for those children continue to compound and to worsen over time and to become more serious and severe. So the earlier we can intervene and try to get that child in a safe environment and to get them the help and the services that they need, then the better off they're going to be in the long run. The effects of child abuse are so serious for children. It really does affect every area of their life. It affects the way that they view themselves, it affects the way that they view other people and just the world in general. It can have serious impact on many areas of development and functioning for them. Despite the seriousness of the effects, we do know that treatment helps. That's the bright side, I think, in all of this. We do know that children are very resilient, and when they're able to get what they need and to learn how to cope with and manage what they've been through, they are able to heal and recover.
I'm wondering for those watching, I think we've probably got a mixture in audience, some that maybe didn't realize what a problem it was. Others maybe are in that boat where they suspect but have been afraid to come forward. But then, of course, based on the statistics that you have given, we know we have some watching that the abuse is occurring in their home, maybe by the hands of a partner or by the hands of a relative, and they don't know what to do. And so I think part of Child Abuse Prevention Month is to work on the front end to prevent it from occurring, but then to prevent it from continuing to occur if they find themselves in that situation. So I want to start with you. let's set up the scenario that we do have a mother or a father, an aunt or an uncle watching, and they know, and they just don't know those first concrete steps, what to do. Would you please step them through that process?
Yeah, they just simply would call our office, and we would ask them, we basically would verbally walk them through the process. We'd ask them what the child's name is, what their current location is, what the family's address is, what their specific concerns are, and how they're aware of that information. And based on their conversation and their concerns, there are some additional follow-up questions that would try to help us assess if it meets state law for us to investigate. And then after the report's made, then we go out and investigate and, like I said, assess if the children can remain safely in the home. So it's an easy process to do, and I encourage people to do such and to not be fearful in making a report.
Okay. And then Lori, for those that may have said, I've done that part, or I've made that call, I've voiced my concerns, maybe we found something, maybe we didn't, but I feel like my child needs to be assessed for their mental and emotional health.
Right.
What does that look like from your perspective of the Purchase Area Sexual Assault Center?
Right. Well, that's one of the services that we provide. We do immediate crisis counseling, and we do long-term therapy. When we work with a child, we want that child and that family to be involved in that process. So initially, if a parent calls in, we would do an assessment with that parent and that child to try to determine where they are as far as the effects of what they may have been through, and then to figure out what appropriate treatment they may need.
And those services, of course, are free and confidential.
Right. All of our services are free and confidential.
To anyone that would qualify for those services. And I hear you saying that we would assess to see if they qualify. And if they don't, we would refer out somewhere else.
Right.
We'll help bridge that gap.
Right.
We've talked about the statistics, we've talked about the scope, we've talked about how to make a report, who's a mandatory reporter. What I would like to do now, since we've got both of you here together, talk to me about things parents, adults can do to keep their child safe.
Well, I would, the most logical thing is just basically talk to your children. I mean, just know what they're involved with, know who their friends are, know who their friends' family members are, and just know everything that you can possibly know about your children, and encourage an open line of communication with them so that they can feel free to discuss their concerns and their worries and bring any fear that they might have to your attention so that you can act appropriately as a parent and address those issues.
Okay.
I do think up until really just the recent history, a lot of the education programs, prevention education programs that were being done in the school really focused on strangers. And what we actually know now is the majority of perpetrators of child abuse are actually friends or family of the child, someone that child has regular, consistent contact with. And so really educating your children about that and really creating an environment where, where they can be open, where there's open communication about that. In the home, as well as just any other setting that you may be in, whether it's workplace, if you work in an environment where there are children, or if you're involved with a church and there's youth groups. Again, just trying to really work to create those open environments where kids can talk and communicate and know that it's okay, that this is something that they can talk about.
And what do you all feel are common mistakes that parents make, maybe in an effort to protect their children, maybe something they could do a different way?
Right. I do think that what I just said, maybe one of those mistakes is assuming that it's going to be the stranger rather than someone within that child's family is a very common mistake.
Anything else come to mind in terms of things the parents might be doing that might be harmful unintentionally?
Oh, just thinking about an incident that came up last week with a child who actually came to the center. She was very much afraid of telling because of the reaction that she thought that her parents may have, because they want their child to know that they really care and they're really concerned. Sometimes parents, this evokes a lot of intense emotions, I think, for parents. And so the way that they talk to children about it, this particular child was afraid that the parent may get so upset that they would then, get into trouble, or they would take action themselves. And so really trying to talk to them in a calm, very stable manner about what could happen or what to do if something like this were happening.
And I think that's an excellent point, because I think as adults we forget what we know what we mean, but how might the child be interpreting that put that in the context of a very uncomfortable topic, and maybe we are doing things that we think are helpful, but they're not helpful.
Right.
When you do talk to children, either one of you, say you're on the investigative team, you know, you in the clinical role, what are some common fears that you do hear from children when they have been through this and they do have to tell?
I think one of the big fears that we hear consistently is that no one will believe them. You know, sometimes their perpetrators have told them, if you tell, no one will believe you.
Right.
And so that is obviously a common fear for them, is that nobody's going to believe them. And I think another fear for them is that we are going to remove them from their home or take them from their parents. And no matter how much any child is abused or neglected, they love their parents. So, you know, we encourage them that, you know, we're here to help them, and we're going to try to help keep them safely in their home. So, and I think those are two common fears that they have.
Just the nature of abuse, the dynamics of what's going on is so confusing and overwhelming for children. And so thinking about what we talked about earlier, that oftentimes the perpetrator is actually someone that they know, that adds a whole nother dimension into, I think, what the consequences may be of telling. They may still care about that person even though they're in a situation where they're being hurt by that person. So they may not only be afraid for themselves and what the consequences may be for themselves, that they won't be believed, that they may be in trouble, but they may also be afraid of what will be the consequences for this person who within the context of the abuse also seems to care about them and maybe a source of attention, you know, and love for them. And then again, just the overall consequences. You know, it changes a child's life to disclose what's going on.
Absolutely. What, besides creating that environment, and what I hear both of you saying there is talk openly, make sure that you're watching how you talk about that. But, you know, as a parent and as probably a viewer watching, it seems to be everywhere. It seems to be on Dateline, it seems to be in the newspaper, it's on TV, we're talking about it today. And what we're telling the viewer is that, and it's probably somebody you know, how do we create that environment without being extreme in that we want to put them in a glass box and they can't go anywhere and they can't be with anybody? What would be your all's advice for parents on how to be balanced in this approach?
I think Bridgett gave some really good tips earlier as far as, you know, just kind of not only knowing your child and creating that open environment for them to talk, but kind of but knowing who their friends are, knowing where they're going. Don't assume that just because they may be going to youth group or this particular group related to school, that may be a safe environment. You need to know who the leaders of those groups are, whether it's a coach at school or a 4-H camp counselor or whatever the activity is. Know who the leaders are in charge of that. And I would want to know as a parent, what have they done to set up safety precautions within that group? You know, have they done some things where those children are more protected, where they're maybe not left alone with a particular adult, where they're doing maybe things as simple as background checks or, you know.
So that they've valued or prioritized safety of the child in that collective group. You know, when you give the numbers that most of this is going to happen, if it's going to happen before the age of 18 or before the age of even 11, I believe you said, you know, that is a very vulnerable time in that children are under the authority of so many different adults, school, church, home, relatives, those sorts of things. What kinds of questions, aside from what you said in terms of making sure they're doing background checks and things like that, what kinds of questions should or could parents ask of their school officials? What are their rights, I guess, as parents to make sure that their environment is safe?
For parents, I think it's important for them to know that they do have the right to go to their school and to ask, what are the policies that school has in place? What are the procedures if a child does report and there is a suspicion? What type of action would the school take? And I think it's really important to point out here too, to make sure that even though it may have been reported within the school system, that it's actually been reported to the appropriate authorities, which would be DCBS or local law enforcement, that it's not appropriate for a school to do their own internal investigation, that actually is the job of protective services and law enforcement.
So one can't be done in place of the other. So Bridgett, would you like to speak to that at all?
Yeah, I mean, we do investigations against school professionals in daycare settings. I mean, in other settings other than just, a home setting. I mean, so if there are some concerns in a school setting or in a daycare setting or in a private child care facility setting, just call and make a report as you would in any other home setting, and we're required to investigate that as well. It is important that people do report to the appropriate authority versus doing their own internal investigation, because anybody can do their own internal investigation, but that's not going to ensure the safety of the child ultimately, which ultimately that's our job and that's our goal. So it's imperative for them to call our office or local law enforcement and to make that report so that the correct actions can be taken to ensure the safety of the child.
I see. And I appreciate that information. I think that's a valuable piece for people. And I do want to add that we do support our educators and our schools and our daycares, and for the most part, things are as they should be. But there are those times when they are not, and so I think it's important that parents do know what do they do if that news is brought to them by their child. What I'd like to talk about now is turn the focus to our local community resources. Let's say this hits a family. Now what? First of all, maybe we should start where you had originally said a few minutes ago, that it does have effects. What kinds of effects does it have on the family, and then what resources are available to the family?
Again, for a family who is impacted by this, it really does affect every aspect of their life initially. And I think that's why it's so important for them to get those intervention services. It's important for that child and the family members to get into some type of treatment, some type of therapy to help them learn how to manage whatever it is that they're trying to cope with at the time. I know with our center, not only do we provide those therapeutic services, but we also provide legal advocacy services. We have an advocate who would be willing to work with them to help them through whatever legal process that they may experience. If this is a case where it's been reported and it's being investigated and there are legal proceedings, it's so important to have that help and support. That's a really difficult process, and you don't know what to expect. And so to have a professional there to help walk you through that and to explain that process is really important.
Okay. And then what are some resources that we can put in the viewer's hand today of help they have available to them in the community?
We're very fortunate in McCracken County that we do have, we have a variety of resources available. I mean, there are lots of local counseling services. PASAC is obviously one. Four Rivers. There's a lot of people that are in private counseling. There's Salvation Army helps families daily, Family Service Society, Paducah Cooperative Ministry, St. Vincent de Paul. A lot of local churches have food banks and clothing banks. Hope Unlimited is a great resource. There's help at the health department. I mean, we have a lot of community resources that are out there to help families with really any need that they have. I mean, if you're watching the show and you feel like you have a need and you're not really sure where to meet that need, you can obviously call our office, and one of our workers can tell you what resource is available in the community and link you up to that, so that you'll have that information and be able to meet whatever need your family has.
And then, Lori, would you talk too about just the role of a child advocacy center in this process? What can the viewer expect from the Purchase Area Sexual Assault and Child Advocacy Center?
Right. Well, when a report is initially made and social services and law enforcement are investigating, we may get involved for several different reasons initially. We provide forensic interview services, so when as part of that investigation they need to interview that child in a formal way, we've got several trained and experienced forensic interviewers, or we may let their own investigators from those offices use our facility for that. That way they've got that information as part of the investigation. If they decide that it's needed or necessary, we can also provide specialized child sexual abuse exams when that may be an important piece of information in the investigation. And then we also work with the other professionals who are involved in the multidisciplinary team here in McCracken County. All of the professionals who are working these child abuse cases, where everybody's working together and communicating and trying to make sure that prosecutory process is as effective as possible.
And then, of course, in addition, like you've already mentioned, the therapy services, the prevention education program. So our role is really to collaborate with you, to collaborate with law enforcement, and everybody's goal, it sounds like, is to make sure the child is safe and the family has what they need to sustain the impact of that news or of that incident that has occurred to them.
From the very first time a child would come in a case like this, our advocate, our family advocate, legal advocate would get involved with that family, and she would really help in meeting with those other professionals and the family members and setting a plan of action and helping them get all of the resources that they might possibly need or put them in touch with those resources in the community.
Well, and I appreciate so much you all talking about this, because I think there is that tendency to not want to see the scope of the problem, and I think you all have established that there is a problem, but then once we know that, it's really nice to know that McCracken County is equipped to handle what is occurring, and there are agencies and there are resources and professionals to help do that.
I think unfortunately sometimes even when people acknowledge that there is a problem, it's hard to acknowledge that it's a problem here. It's a problem that affects us all. Whether it's here in McCracken County or anywhere else in this country, child abuse is a problem that really does affect everyone. So I think that we all do have the responsibility to talk about it, to raise awareness, to try to figure out what we can do to take some responsibility in working.
And so the month is awareness and it is education, and there are all kinds of activities going on this month. Both of you know about it, so one of you talk about the pinwheels that folks may see at the McCracken County Courthouse lawn.
Well, on the courthouse lawn, there are pinwheels which do represent, every pinwheel represents a child of a substantiated child abuse case this past year here in McCracken County. And this is a project that's actually going on region-wide right now in each county throughout the purchase area.
So if they go to other counties and they see those pinwheels, it means that same thing.
And again, it's just really a way to bring awareness. You know, people may not realize here in McCracken County that many children have actually, we have found that many children of substantiated abuse cases.
And I think it's important to note that those have been substantiated. Bridgett, are there times when cases can't be substantiated, but where the child maybe has experienced some sort of incident?
Yes, it is. I mean, substantiated is our word for saying that abuse happened, basically. There are low-risk cases that we investigate where we do not make a finding of abuse. It's our job to assess the safety and what services the family might need and plug in referrals to help the family with whatever need they might have. So, those are the cases that were high risk and that were found to be abuse. But there are lots of other cases. The majority of our cases are not found to be true. Thank goodness, and or are just low risk referrals where we work to try to assist the family.
I see, and I bring that up for the purpose of those numbers that you gave earlier and that you gave earlier were shocking, and those are the substantiated ones. But there are others that are low risk that even lend to the greater scope of the problem. So that's why I bring that up. We are out of time for today. Thank you so much, Bridgett, for joining us, Lori, and thank you for joining us as we talk about a critical topic to our county. And I hope that you have come away with a couple of things today. I hope that you've come away with an understanding of the scope of the problem, an idea of how you can get assistance if you would need it, but I hope that you feel an obligation as a viewer to put on a blue ribbon or to look a little closer to something that may not look just quite right, and I hope that you will become an active part of child abuse prevention. Until next time, I hope that you will be safe and hope that you will join us for Rays of Hope. Thank you.